Welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. I want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by Habitly.com, and you've got soft skills courses on there that can really improve your habits, your behaviors. One that relates to our podcast today is on leadership, and we have 3 strands of leadership on there, but we also have all kinds of things that help leaders and their people. Check it out, 7 days free, Habitly.com. Today's episode is with Michael Yinger, and he is the CEO of ResumeSieve, an HR tech startup. And he's a really sharp guy. He's been doing recruiting technology, recruiting stuff for decades. We talk about some interesting things that affect how you hire people and also how you network for new business. I think you'll enjoy it. Let's dive in. Michael, it is great to have you on the show. I'm going to flip this. Normally, I wait till the end of the show and I say, hey, what's the final tip you have for our people? What's a great lesson you want to leave them with? How about we start with the great tip? Because I'm wondering, with your background, that might lead into all kinds of conversation.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. The one thing I say to everybody, and this includes my children, and I have a number of children, some who are young and some who are not, you got to build your network early. I read a book early in my career, which was called Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. And networking is just almost the milk of life, not to be too fruity about it, but it gets you jobs, it gets you out of trouble, it gets you advice. It can help you, moving in a new direction. Trying to do everything on your own, trying to learn everything from scratch. I think is the hard way to go through life. Figure out who you know, continue to grow those networks. And by the way, today it's so much easier than when I was coming up, when keeping your network meant a 3x5 card, so that you keep track of people, right? Yeah, exactly. It was a Rolodex, but now you've got LinkedIn. It practically builds the network itself. There are other tools that are out there. That's important. Having a support infrastructure that's maybe outside your work and is someplace you can go, find new ideas, find new jobs, whatever the case may be. It's really important to have that, I think.
Very interesting, because when I talk with people about leadership, I emphasize that, like, when you disagree with someone, you need to choose the relationship, not winning. Yeah. But to be candid with you, Michael, I'm introverted. So I'm on this show and I love people. So I can talk to people one-on-one, it's no problem, that type of thing. But networking, to me, it makes the hair go up on the back of my neck. So talk to me about networking, what that looks like. I'm curious first on the professional side of networking, but you also mentioned having strong personal network too. Why don't we handle the professional side first? But I would like to go to the personal side. So how does somebody do that? It's not just going out and passing out business cards.
No, not anymore. And by the way, when you said the hair on the back of your neck went up, so did mine. So I totally get where you're coming from. It's often a struggle, and part of it for me is to recognize that I'm putting up my own barriers. I mean, that's the first thing, right? I'm a firm believer that I'm in control of what goes on in my life, and I'm the one who's making choices about what I do and don't do, and so it's coming up against that for some people. Now, there are others. One of my sons, actually, all of my sons, quite frankly, are really good at networking, and so I'm just saying they got it from their mothers. They just, they'll talk to anybody about anything at any time, and they come away with, a relationship and a connection. For me, it is a conscious effort to be in a conversation and share with somebody. I had a networking call this morning, and it was a random thing that I had been doing some reach out via LinkedIn, and the person I was talking to, happened to have somebody in common in our lives, and that's what started the conversation. But the net result of that is a result, because of that conversation, he's going to be on my podcast. We're talking about maybe we can do something from a partnership perspective. And I had to make the effort to be in the conversation, and that's the key to networking. It's not all going to come to you, and being an introvert doesn't mean that you can't network and that you can't be in a conversation with people. Sometimes it's just talking about the weather, finding something in common, often the key to networking is asking questions as opposed to telling. It's not really networking just to tell somebody who you are and whatnot. You get more of a flow to it if you're asking them about who they are and getting the conversation going in that way. So that's the way I started. I always started with a conversation with a question. Once you get past, well, my name is Mike and your name is David, then well, what do you do and how did you come to that and what's interesting about it? Whatever the case may be, it's being in a conversation where you're asking for something from somebody.
Let's back it up a little bit. So let's talk about some specific places to network.
Sure.
So choose one and tell me how you do that. You mentioned LinkedIn. How do you network on LinkedIn?
So with LinkedIn, particularly today, where people are inundated from LinkedIn, right? There's people reaching out to pitch to them all the time. If there's a certain kind of person that you want to network with, now in my case, for example, I'm choosing to network with CEOs and CHROs, and the way I start the conversation is that I tell them, look, I've got this podcast, and this is what my podcast is about, and I would like to talk with you about being a guest on my podcast. And about 1 in 5 say yes. Almost all of them connect with me. Maybe 50% connect with me. But 1 in 5 will say yes. And then that allows us to be in a conversation about what is it they do, what is it that I do. I've obviously done some research, right? So this is a more deliberate kind of networking. Still in a business context, there are always opportunities. I was invited on a lake cruise a few weeks ago by a local organization that I participate in, a tech leader organization. And so I went with nothing more than the intention of meeting 3 or 4 new people that I had not met who were part of this community and getting to know them a little bit, and perhaps that leads to something further, or maybe it just becomes another connection in the network. You never know where things are going to turn out. Now, just to show you a huge coincidence, I met somebody for the first time yesterday about a volunteer opportunity that I had raised my hand for an organization, and she said at the end of the conversation, by the way, I just got one of your messages on LinkedIn, and I think it was, sort of a business outreach, and I wanted to wait until this conversation to talk about it. So why don't you tell me what you were trying to get through to me from that message? True story. So we had a conversation, and there's a possibility that we might do some business. It's just the world is such a small place. You never know.
Yeah, and staying with LinkedIn for a moment, because I think it is really challenging for a lot of people, is that messaging needs to be just engaging and not selling, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's kind of like we got these interests. It's like one of the messages I sent out is like, what I deal with is people who have employees who don't behave well. And I list some of the bad behaviors, and I say, if you have any of those problems, I got clients who might have some ideas, happy to have a short conversation. And even when I have the conversation, I had one of them earlier today. And like you, I actually had the guy asking me, hey, I'm willing to pay for your services. You don't just have to have a free conversation.
Wow.
I have some needs, because I was being too casual and I didn't want to sell. And I sincerely cared about the guy. And so it was, but I think LinkedIn, is that the approach kind of you're doing as far as engaging in a conversation?
I am now, in previous lives, you're chatting with somebody in the airport, you're sitting next to them on a plane. I used to commute from New Jersey into New York City by train a few times a week. And there was a guy that I saw several times, and we struck up a conversation. We ended up being in a business relationship for a number of years. One of my best friends, again, true story, I had seen him 3 weeks in a row on the same airplane. And then I ran into him in a store in Princeton, New Jersey. Turns out we both lived in Colorado. We were both commuting to New Jersey, to Princeton, New Jersey, no less, for different consulting gigs. And we have been friends for 23, 24 years. We've climbed mountains together. We were just in California together. It's you got to take the opportunity. If it's out of your comfort zone, you just recognize that and step out of your comfort zone. For some people, chatting people up is that's okay. That's what they do. And then, cement it, go far enough to, get contact information. It's one thing just to have a chat with somebody in line, but how do you get their contact information? How do you follow up on the conversation? There's some deliberateness to it that's important. And again, LinkedIn makes it so much easier now than it used to be.
Yeah. One last question on the networking piece. And that is, what about local stuff to get involved in? What from a professional standpoint, I think on the personal standpoint, you can touch on that too, but particularly on the professional standpoint, what would make sense to get involved in from a networking perspective locally?
I think the first place to start is affinity groups, meaning things that you are interested in. So, for example, I'm in the technology space, and I've also been in the project management space, and there are organizations here locally for me that I can go and be in events and meet people. They have, they sponsor things, and those are not hard to find. The other thing that has become very prevalent, particularly from COVID, and I think it's one thing that might logically continue, is just flat out networking groups. Now, some of these cost money, which is kind of an awkward thing that you have to deal with, but sometimes it's just people who are in the same profession or have the same kind of job, maybe not at all in the same industry. And so you can find those things are not hard to find if that's what you're interested in doing. And then, there are national organizations that Vistage is one that comes to mind. And there are several others where you can just join them. And then there are professional associations. I said I was volunteering. That's for an organization that's in the talent acquisition space. I did some very interesting work for the Project Management Institute 15, 20 years ago, over a period of several years, where I just raised my hand and said, hey, that's interesting. And so they drafted me and they brought me on, and they just give me more projects, and that allowed me to meet more people. Often it's just you have to open yourself up to the possibility. That's really where it starts. And then you have to be careful that you don't take on too much. How many places can you go? How many events can you do? Are you targeted? Are you focused on something that is in alignment with what you want to do with a career, if you have that vision?
Well, that brings up a good point. So you're reminding me of two things. One is that if you get involved, like with a nonprofit or with a group like you're discussing, you brought up a very valid thing, and that is that try to find a way to serve. And it may not be in a role where you're like the director or heading up even a committee, but participating in a committee or even showing up at the door and signing people in. I mean, that's a great way to meet people. Doing different things like that can be really helpful as far as meeting people. So you found that to be effective also.
Yep. I have a number of long-term relationships that came from these volunteer opportunities, because you tend to find like-minded people and people who, particularly in the not-for-profit space, it's people who are looking for something beyond themselves, which can be kind of cool. You can get involved in some cool projects and maybe make a difference. If it's a professional association, PMI at the time was where my business was, or I was in project management. You get some learning out of it, which is always a good thing, as well as the contacts. But it's the contacts that I take away in the long run.
And I loved what you said about being careful that you choose the groups you want to network with that you really want to be part of, because you can't spread yourself too thin. Another piece of that is that as you make these connections, even if you're introverted, then be a connector. So if somebody talks to you and says, I have this need, or I got this problem, or whatever, you don't have to be the know-it-all, but say, oh, you know what? That person over there, they might have an answer for you. And you connect people, and that really helps build the relationship. It sounds like that's the type of thing you've done also, right?
Oh, absolutely. I won't say it's a weekly event, but it's certainly something that happens many times over the course of a year. Is that somebody will say, "Well, how about this?" And I'll say, "Well, okay, you need to talk to this person," and often it comes back around. I was on a call today, and the conversation was about obstacles towards getting our businesses up and running by the end of the year. And the guy said to me, "Well, could I be on your podcast?" And so we talked about that as a possibility. And he said, "You know what? There's somebody I think you should meet because I see them fitting in with you like this." I wasn't asking for help. He just put a connection together in his mind, and something may come from it, something may not, but I guarantee it'll be an interesting conversation.
Yeah. Let me shift gears.
Yeah.
I know you're an expert on resumes. ResumeSieve,
yeah.
right? So your company. So what about hiring biases and how that affects a company long term? I mean, there's a lot of talk about bias. Some of it's healthy, some of it's unhealthy. Where do you kind of go when people bring up hiring bias and how to avoid that and what it looks like today, whatever? Sounds like it's opening Pandora's box.
Well, we could go on, and I'll try to keep it short. Hiring bias is a real thing because we can't help it. We have biases that are inherent in who we are as people, and the question is, do you recognize them? So there are a couple of different avenues that companies who are really serious about this can pursue. There is some technology that will help you in the early stages of recruitment by sourcing for the right things, by blurring things like gender and ethnicity so those don't become part of the decision making and so forth. There are some challenges with those tools as well. You have to watch what they're doing. You may remember the experiment Microsoft tried a few years ago where they put out an AI chatbot, and it took about 8.5 hours to be programmed into a raving lunatic, spouting all sorts of. This was a public experiment they did, and it took only 8 hours to turn this thing into something really terrible, because it was learning from the input it was getting, right? And so that's the challenge with some of the technology. So I'm a firm believer in the concept of this of artificial intelligence as applied to this, and you have to pay attention. You can't just assume that it's going to do the right thing because somebody programmed it and somebody continues to provide it input. You got to be watching. So there's technology who can help. At the end of the day, it's about the people who are making the decisions. We had a client years ago, and our objective was to provide them a slate of candidates for their jobs, and we had certain standards in terms of gender and ethnicity they were supposed to meet. And just for the sake of argument, say 50% of the slate had to be diverse, either gender or ethnicity. We were far exceeding that. We were in the 60, 75% range, and they came to us and said, well, look at the people we're hiring. They're not diverse. And we would say, yeah. Where is the decision being made? We're handing you the candidates. What are you doing with them? And so this was in the early days.
Let me ask you a question about that.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question because so you were handing the candidates, let's say there's, like you said, 60, 70% were quote unquote diverse, but they weren't hiring them, and they're concerned because they wanted more of a mix. What do you do when 60 to 70% are diverse, but they're not as strong of a candidate skill-wise or experience-wise as the other candidates, whichever way it's going, What do you do about that?
First thing I would say is you got to be careful with that as a premise, because if we were an outsourced firm, we were providing candidates for this particular client. If we're not providing the best possible candidates, irrespective of gender and ethnicity, then we're not doing our job. If we're putting people on the slate just because they tick this other box, that's not the right answer, because then that's not good for a lot of reasons. A company's not going to be successful. The ill will that you create. Now, in the early days of thinking, it was all about the diversity, which was just numbers, right? Diversity really, when people talk about diversity, it's talking about changing the mix, right? Well, today we talk about DEI and B, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And equity is making sure that everybody gets treated roughly the same, right? When you're at the same level.
Right.
Inclusion says that your organization includes everybody who is a member of it, and belonging is ensuring that is a continuous kind of aspect. And so there has been a real shift in not so much the thinking, but just in the fact that you can't just get the numbers, because just getting the numbers doesn't get you there. I'll give you an example.
I agree.
I had a hospitality client, and they were 75% female because everybody who made beds for their properties was female. So were they really diverse? No, and they knew it, and they were working on it. So they were an example of a company that was aware of where they were in the society. Now, you started with saying, well, why? Why do we care? Well, the stats will show you companies that are diverse and have good equity and inclusion are more productive, have better cash flow, have longer retention, have higher engagement scores, because people generally like to work in an environment that represents the society that they live in. People don't, they're more successful when their work life looks like the street life that's around them. And so study after study shows that there are huge benefits about at least being concerned with your diversity. Now, sometimes it's a challenge.
Before you go on, let me just interject. So first of all, I want to thank you that you clarified my question on your 60, 70% were diverse, but they weren't getting hired. That you made a very important point that I wasn't thinking of, and I apologize, that because they were being pre-qualified, they were all being pre-qualified to the same standards. So if they're all pre-qualified to the same standards, then the hiring should be pretty close, ideally. Okay, totally agree. Yeah. Let me go to your situation that you just outlined, that the hotel has 75% women, and you're saying they're working on the diversity. So for me, and I'm just looking for the best solution. Okay, I don't have any other bias.
Yeah, sure.
And I hope that comes across to the audience because it's sincere. But if I've got a hotel, 75% of women, because those people in my workplace are typically the type that would be hired for this type of job, like cleaning up the rooms, whatever. And I have had, men who are cleaning up my rooms when I've stayed at a hotel. So I've seen that too. But is it really important that there's diversity in that number?
The important distinction is not to think about sort of the gross diversity, but to think about the diversity in the levels in the organization. So if you've got 75% women and all those women are hourly, and the 25% of the people who are management and above are all something else, then you're not particularly diverse. It's totally how are you blended, because there will be certain demographics, maybe certain genders that are attracted to certain kinds of professions. Okay,
right.
And it's what you got to look at the organization in smaller bites to really get a true picture of whether they're serious about being a diverse organization and providing opportunity. See, that's where the equity and the inclusion comes in, right? Is it equity if everybody who's hourly happens to be one particular gender and everybody else is the other? That doesn't sound like a very diverse organization. It sounds like you've got the right numbers, but not you're really not getting to the spirit of diversity, if you will. And that's the challenge that companies have to have. It's not. It's not that you should go out and fire everybody and rehire. It's what are you doing to have your organization be more in concert with the society that we live in, and whether you're here or you're in some other country. It's an interesting challenge. And again, the stats show time and time again that it is beneficial to the organization to be thinking in these kinds of terms, because you get productivity, retention, engagement, all the good things that you want to have to be successful in the long run.
Yeah, I haven't looked at the numbers, but wouldn't, if you had an organization that was the majority were people of a single heritage. Let's keep it very generic. Single heritage. that they would have a certain, and I'm not advocating that, but wouldn't they have a certain amount of camaraderie potentially if they did a culture match with their values as an organization, and they had that whether they were a bunch of, anyway, I don't want to start naming different heritages, but wouldn't they have a certain amount of commonality that would enable them to have a very strong company culture, high productivity also? Or would it be that maybe because they had, no, I don't think heritage indicates they all have the same good or bad habits, but
they may not have the same beliefs. So let's think about what you said. Let's break it down a little bit.
Yeah.
Might they have a very strong corporate culture? Yes, they might, around that particular heritage.
Yeah.
One of the hallmarks of diversity is the breadth of thought and the different kind of ideas that can combine and create synergy, where if you all think the same, you might not see the best way to move forward. You might not be thinking in the most optimal way, doing it the same way you've always done it. You've got to be careful to draw too broad. And you look at the organizations, and these are the kind of things that they say, that there's more innovation, that you've got different ideas, different beliefs, and where those are embraced as opposed to challenged, you have the opportunity of creating something that was stronger than just a single set of beliefs would have been. That's, I think, what's behind a lot of this.
I think one of the challenges too is that so like you see this in more of the generic sense in like big city fire departments in particular, police departments,
sure,
where it's like we're going to hire whether it's women or a particular minority, whatever, and like particularly when it comes to promotions, it's like the white guys, you can take the test, you can get the highest score, but you're not going to advance because we're going to move these people forward. And I think it's just difficult. I don't know the answer, but I think it's very difficult. And I was thinking about it, you extend it out. And so let's say I want to help, I'm the hotel, and we are 95% men in the management ranks, and we are, almost everybody in the cleanup the rooms crew is women. So I want to advance women. And so in that case, since I've pretty much only got women, I could offer some different courses to build their soft skills, to build their management skills, whatever, that are for those people. But then if I've got kind of a diverse mix and I'm trying to look for this target that's a diversity target, I want more women or I want more of a particular heritage, do I only offer those courses to the type of people I want to advance? Or it really gets difficult, doesn't it?
It gets difficult, and the challenge is first recognizing that there's an issue. Maybe you're comfortable with the demographics of your organization. Okay. If you recognize that you want to change the demographics of your organization, then it's creating a plan. And the plan doesn't mean fire all these people and hire all these people instead, or only promote people that match this particular set of criteria. You still have to think about what's for the best of the organization. It's creating the opportunity where the reason that an organization ends up being unbalanced is the way you described it, is because there have been hiring practices over time that have allowed it to become unbalanced. Yeah. And so part of the challenge is recognizing that you've got these, and it goes back to your original question, these biases around who we hire. And so it will take time. Do you go in and you fire everybody and hire everybody new? That doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't make sense for the people who are being fired. It doesn't help your organization, doesn't help your customers and all the rest. If you're growing, well, that's great, because then you can add more to the mix. But if all you're doing is sort of, standard attrition, then just be aware of, instead of having, if you've got a slate of 5, maybe it's 60-40 instead of 4-1. Where in the past it would have been 4-1. You'd have the one token, and then you'd have the other 4 that look just like everybody else. go back and look at the data. Is that what the data is telling you? That's the way you have been evaluating people, and make a conscious effort around creating an environment where bringing in people of a diverse background who have the qualifications necessary for the job is embraced, as opposed to people just continue to hire people that look like them. And it's a very common bias is we hire people that look like us because it's easier, safer, No,
and I think that there can be subconscious comfort level there also.
Absolutely.
I think the critical factor you're bringing up is that you have to compare apples to apples. So you have to have people that have similar skill sets. That's where you got to drive. And if people of a particular heritage or gender don't have that, in some ways it's almost outside of your company. There needs to be like a nonprofit. There needs to be churches. There need to be whatever that are helping these people develop their skills so they can compete for those positions. I remember many years ago, this is probably 30 years ago, there was, I had two guys. I went to the gym, worked out. There were two Bobs. One Bob was this Asian dude, and this guy was built. I mean, he was like a Marvel superhero. Okay. He was like 6'2" like me, but every ounce of him was muscle. Greatest guy in the world. And he became a fireman in San Francisco. And then he commented a few months later, I was checking with him, and he said he was really frustrated because he had worked so hard to become a fireman and go through the process. And then they had hired a woman as a fireman who weighed about 92 pounds. She was only hired because she was a woman, and she was probably reasonably smart. I mean, I'm not saying, but he said, I don't want to be in a burning building and I have to depend on her to carry me out because she doesn't have the physical capability. So, this whole thing, but and I hope I'm not bothering anybody with that, but it was a good point. It's like what you have to have some standards and some, if you want a particular group to be there, let's build them up so they can compete. Right. And I want to ask you, because I've never heard it before, the B, DEI and B.
Yeah.
So talk to me about the belonging piece, because I think that's a critical factor in what you're talking about.
It is. Yeah. So you've got diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and equity, making sure everything's the same-ish, inclusion, that, your organization is accepting, and then belonging is what comes from that. And so in a sense, the belonging is the result where everybody feels like they belong to the organization and you create, what you're doing is you're creating a culture where all the diverse people that you bring in belong to the organization, because your organization is embracing that diversity, recognizing that diversity is supportive of an organization's success, but it's also supportive of individual's personal success. So it's a key part. It's fairly new. It's one of those things that I hope it doesn't go any further, because I got 4 letters and I don't know if I can handle a 5th. If somebody decided, I'd have to spend some time rememorizing. I'll be honest with you. And it's sort of the capstone of the concept where we started early on with just changing the numbers. And then it was about making sure the treatment was the same and that people were treated as part of the organization. And then that created this whole sense of belonging, which becomes part of the culture. So this is a really, for some companies, not everybody does it, but for some companies, this is a big deal that, people who are in charge of the DEI and B can sit very high in an organization. And quite frankly, for it to be successful, it really does have to start from the top. There has to be recognition of and support of whatever is necessary. So it's making sure that the hiring standards are met and that people are provided, because training goes both ways, right? There's training people for skills, but there's also training people to recognize that they might have unconscious bias that's impacting how they're interacting with the people that they're hiring and the people that are working for them. So there, if this is something that you're committed to as an organization, again, it's demonstrated to make some sense, and it's a choice. The government will legislate to a certain extent, and there has been some legislation around the D part, but not the EID+B, because how do you legislate that, right? Well, they might get to legislating equity at some point, but they haven't done it yet. But certainly, there are, if you've got government jobs and whatnot, you have to have a certain number of people and so on and so forth. So there is some push for that, but that's not the same as changing your culture, right? That's just following a law.
And I would say that the bias is a negative soft skill that you have to learn, that you have to overcome. It's interesting what you say with the belonging, because our system that I started with 12 steps to great leadership, I developed a 12-step program for bad leaders, and I've narrowed it down to 3. I call it 3 strands leadership. The first is systematic power, which is the foundation of all your systems. And then the second is meaningful work. That's the heart, really pumps the energy in, engage people in meaningful work. But similar to belonging, the third strand is sincere gratitude, that you value your people and you make them feel appreciated and engage them and that type of thing. That holds it all together the same way you say with the belonging. So, Michael, I think we just got started, but how can people learn more about you, what you're doing? Because I really love what you're saying. You've got some great advice for people and probably some great tools.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I'm really easy to get a hold of. It's Mike Yinger on LinkedIn. You can find me, and I'm open to networking and seeing where that goes. My email is michael@ResumeSieve.com. And so those are the 2 easiest ways to get a hold of me, and I'm responsive to both of those channels.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I think it's been a great discussion, helpful to our audience.
Great, David. I appreciate it, and I enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for tuning in today. If you like the episode with Michael, leave us a comment or a rating. We always like to hear your feedback. Also, remember our sponsor, Habitly.com. We all have strengths that we want to take and make even stronger. Those behaviors, those habits that make you achieve the things that you want to achieve. The other side of it is we have areas that need improvement. And this is where Habitly comes in. These are trainings on the habits of highly successful people. Check it out, Habitly.com. Can't go wrong. First 7 days free. And stay tuned. We have more great people coming on the show.